Hi, we're here with Kirsten, and we're discussing the future of leadership and also some of the messages from my book, Time for Humanity. We spoke to some clients and we did some polls on social media platforms to find out what part of the book we should start exploring. And conscious leadership came out as the clear first theme. So that's the context of this call. Kirsten, how are you doing?
Really well, thanks, Samie. How are you?
I'm very well also. I can see that in the UK, spring has sprung.
It has indeed.
Well, thanks to everybody who sent across their questions and comments. Let's kick off. What's the first one?
So the first question is from Marie Agnes. She asks, how do you manage teams remotely and keep a sense of cohesiveness?
Well, obviously, it's a great question in these challenging times. I heard somebody say the other day, we're all in this storm together. Some are sailing, some are swimming, and others are drowning. And what really resonated for me in that was we're not all having the same experience at the moment of work. And keeping that sense of team connectedness and cohesion should be at the forefront of leaders' minds. But if we think about everyone who we lead requires something different, for me, that intentionality of connection is really important. So personally, I'm not a huge fan of WhatsApp groups. And then I found in my leadership, I was asking individuals, would you mind to be added to this group? And giving people the permission to dip out so they're not always constantly getting messages or the equivalent with instant messenger, for example. I have a tendency, which some of my team love, some hate, but to send voice notes. And I was given feedback by somebody on my team to say, those voice notes are challenging because it's not easy then to review the notes afterwards to see what are the items that need to be actioned. In other words, we were just finding ways to be more efficient and effective in our communication whilst being remote, holding the intention where that makes sense to come back together when it's safe to do so. But I've been managing virtual teams for most of my corporate career in regional roles or global roles, these conversations being based in Dubai, where we work Sunday to Thursday versus other parts of the world, Monday to Friday, or in Hong Kong, when I was based there, the time difference between New York or London meant that we were having these conversations years ago. It's just that they've evolved to think about how do we stay more connected, more, to use Marie Agnes's term, cohesive, but giving thought to different people are experiencing this in different ways. I don't think it's true to say you cannot lead in virtual teams. You know, I've met gamers before who say working on a shared problem together has really brought them closer. I've got brilliant relationships with people who I've never met. So I think it comes back to that term intentionality. And then how do you bring in more of ourselves into the connection? And I think there's different ways to do it. So for example, we've done 30-second photographs and then sharing information about what they represent, but being clear that it's not an icebreaker or an activity, it's linked to a purpose and intention. Or Mr. Gurkles, my cat, has made some show and tell appearances as well. I think that's one of the things that working from home has given us, an insight into our personal worlds, our personal values, and helped us to chip away at that disconnect between how we show up at home versus in the traditional workplace or the office building. Check-ins, you know, what's the thing that you're most proud of from last week? What is your greatest challenge, or what are you struggling with at the moment? Going into breakout rooms if you have larger teams or you want to create more psychological safety, perhaps with a new team member who you may not have even met if they've joined in the last year. Mm-hmm. And asking questions around what's on your heart and mind, what support do you need from us, or how are you really doing, as opposed to just how are you, and how response very well, how are you? So just going a little bit deeper, but using the technology to be able to access that. What about you, Kirsten? What's worked for you during the lockdowns?
Firstly, a comment. I'm going to be quite controversial quite early and say that I disagree with your team. I think the voice notes are fabulous. It's definitely a way where there's nothing being open to interpretation, because we can hear the nuances in your voice and the intention. That to me is a big factor in the connectivity, because we don't have connectiveness through emails. Tone is very much something that is received and given in different manners. What I've been doing with my team is making sure I check in with them, not just on a professional level, but check in personally and say to them, no, really, how are you doing? this has been going on for a lot longer than any of us anticipated. So is there anything I can do? Is there anything we can do to support you? Is there anything that you're not feeling that secure about? Is there anything that's worrying you? And I think a lot of stuff by asking those open questions is drawing out a lot of information from people.
Mm. And I am making an assumption, I don't know your team, but I think people seek consistency, and asking that on a consistent basis, of course, not too much, and not making an assumption that everybody is struggling in the same way, as I said earlier, but just by consistently asking those questions, I think people will realize that you really mean it. And should something arise that they want to share with you as their leader, then it's more likely that they will. But we say, like a rule of thumb, in general, my advice would be to over-communicate during these times. Now, of course, everything can become an overdone strength. That is the tightrope that we walk in leadership. It's a fine balance, a fine line. But I remember when I used to work in aviation, if the pilots would communicate regularly with the passengers during a delay, then people would understand, it would be calm. But if the pilots were busy working on the problem and they chose not to get on the tannoy, the announcement to update, then we used to call those flights from hell. So I think that nobody wants to have an unsafe flight. You know, if there's a problem with the engine, we're all good. We understand nuances enough to be able to say, this is challenging. We don't really have clarity on when the situation is going to change, but I know that my leader is going to continue to update me, even if there is no update. And that allows some of the question marks to just disappear and for me to focus on bringing my best self to work.
Now, I have a friend whose manager calls her at 5 p.m. every Friday evening to see what she's doing work-wise. And technically, Friday should be a 5:30 finish for my friend. But everyone leaves a little early on a Friday. That's the perks of being in an adult. Yeah, she gets a call at 5 p.m. and has to be seen to be working. And it's just creating this false economy because my friend is definitely not working at 5 p.m. on Friday. And it's the lack of trust, I think. So that dynamic has now faltered during the pandemic because the employee doesn't feel trusted, and clearly the employer manager does not trust.
I've even seen some people put their watches onto their laptop so that as it tick, 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 it makes a movement and shows that you continue to be online for instant messenger whilst they're doing other things. And of course, that's a low trust environment, and trust or vulnerability-based trust is the foundation of everything if we're looking at good leadership. But yeah, I mean, asking people, what do you need during these times could include, what are some of the stresses from working from home? So for example, where I'm speaking to you from today, I'm very aware that the doorbell could ring at any time. It could be a delivery, but it could be also building maintenance. Or as you may know from our other conversations, we have some crows that awaken in the afternoon. So the masses of crows, or I was doing a media piece the other week, and as soon as we started, we went live on TV, the cat started sneezing. So they're little things. Of course, you could have kids, you could have flatmates, but cutting of the hedges the other day or building maintenance, they're all creating certain distractions, which I think people do bring to these interactions and just stops us from being fully present or connected.
Absolutely. And we have a comment from Marco in Serbia. And he said, we've gone through decades of leadership by title rather than by shared value. This has brought us to the point that people do not have sincere trust in leaders and leadership as a concept, but they follow it because somebody needs to lead. This is where you see the most significant challenge, but yet the biggest opportunity to restore trust in leadership. The opportunity is in being who you are, being authentic, bringing others with you to succeed together, and paving the path for future leaders to travel further than you did. A great point by Marco.
Absolutely. Well, Marco is one of those conscious leaders that we're exploring today. I love what he says about being who you are. I can't tell you the number of leaders who I work with when I ask them, what are your 3 core values, the values that inform or give energy to everything that you do? And most people aren't able to respond with them rolling off the tongue. I would love us to get to a stage where we could just recite, if you imagine a pyramid, what is your core value or top 2 or top 3 values? Because I think leaders over the last couple of years have learned about authenticity and vulnerability. We don't really have a common definition of that. And some leaders I found think that vulnerability is saying, oh, I had a bad night's sleep. That's a kind of insight into your world. Or I might have had an argument with my partner, for example. And it's like, okay, but do I really get to know you from that? In my mind, it's level 1 vulnerability, which is a good thing, but I don't really get to know who you are. And again, it's a balance, a tightrope. How do you feel comfortable in your national culture and the organizational culture to show more of you and bring more of yourself to the leadership position? Because that's what your people find inspiring. I've never found people inspired by talking about the numbers or what we need to deliver from a results perspective. I have, however, heard people being inspired by a value of excellence and succeeding together and working on the rituals, the beliefs in the system in order for people to work together. That's leadership. Or to borrow the language of Marco, paving the way for other people to do even better. You know, when I think about disappointment, it's the chasm between the stories that we tell ourselves about leadership, inspiring videos, TED Talks, the articles, you know, what I see on LinkedIn, it's all very positive stuff around leadership. The chasm between the stories that we tell and the lived experience that people have of their leader, which, as we know, by so many people say, it's leadership by designation or by title, rather than bringing others with you, letting go of ego, doing your work. You know, that's the thing. If you spend time with me in Dubai, you'll always hear me say, do your work, and everything else will follow from that space. And I think that that's what people are looking for, this sense of, how do you bring your personal core values? Where appropriate, go to level 2, maybe even level 3 with 1 or 2 people in your team, with that sense of vulnerability-based trust. And the expectation is that the leader will go first. The leader will take that leap of faith and to do something different. But trust cannot be built or rebuilt, restored, if there is blame and judgment. And so none of what I'm saying carries that energy. You'll hear me say, can we agree to what is? We don't need to agree with everything, but to what is today. And then from that space, can we move forward with a new kind of leadership, which you can call whatever you like. But in the book, we've called it conscious leadership, and that's what we're exploring today. What's your sense?
I love when you discuss leadership is a verb. So we need to actually be doing things, and mistakenly thinking that leadership is having and voicing an opinion. That is not leadership. I think that we very much need to have our core values set, but they can't be disingenuous. You cannot say honesty, integrity, truth, and not live those values. And I think that's where a lot of leaders come unstuck, is they're professing truth and the next comment out of their mouth is a lie. Mm. So I think we need to, get people to live by the values and be somewhat accountable to those values.
Absolutely. Well, that's the challenge with leadership. You put your hand up for this incredible position that will leave a legacy long beyond, our existence on this earth. And like a goldfish bowl, you're visible at all times, and people are looking for that congruence because it's in our brain that we're scanning for psychological safety at all times. And when we sense a disconnect, then that creates a separation. And as I say in the book, in any given moment, we have a choice to join or to separate. And it's a real challenge to be always on. That's why it's important to create that vulnerability and authenticity, because in doing so, people will see you. You're a human being. We're not always optimal, especially after the year that the whole of humanity has experienced. I think it's Covey that talks about an emotional bank account. And if you imagine that instead of a currency of being money, there's a currency of trust in all of your relationships, there are certain little things that you can do starting today to put some more deposits rather than just withdrawing from the relationships constantly. So attend to the little things. For example, reply to your emails or provide clarity. offer people the opportunity to say, could you reword that? Rather than just closing down the Zoom call with the expectation that people have understood. Clarifying those expectations, people find super useful, particularly in a virtual world and the global world that we live in, with different national cultures and languages that are spoken. Honor or keep your commitments that you make. I was so impressed today with a leader I work with in France. The individual said, today, the French government have decided that we can't use nurseries, they've closed them down. Therefore, I'm going to send the stuff across maybe on Thursday morning, but you could also expect it on Wednesday night. I just loved that interaction because somebody was proactively signposting something in our relationship. And I just felt trust was going through the roof, aside from any deliverable that we had agreed on before. Yeah, I think if we were to rate all of our relationships, or another way to say that, all of our investments, what would we notice? Which ones are we withdrawing from more than depositing, and where can those deposits be made, or what could they look like in the relationship?
Absolutely. We have a comment from Andre in South Africa, and he says how it can be a challenge to admit when we're wrong. Some of us are hard on ourselves when we're wrong, but it's all part of being human. And believe it or not, being wrong makes us stronger. We learn, we grow, we allow a team functioning as one to lift us up when we have fallen. We don't get stuck when we mess up, but we press each other on and get better. We will never be perfect, but as long as we strive for excellence and drive continual improvement, we will have the greatest chance of getting as close as we can. So I encourage all of us today, myself included, if we make a mistake, let's not get stuck there, and let's not go into defense and justification mode.
Yeah, well, I think it is a real strength to be able to say, I got something wrong as a leader. I think people are looking for that. You know, we were talking before about humanity are able to be nuanced enough to understand that these things are complex. So the public, from a political perspective, understand at the moment there are conflicting or contradictory views that politicians need to be able to work through. Or when you think about leaders in business, I think that people are able to realize that leaders are working through this murkiness, but we're looking for humility rather than that level of hubris that perhaps that we've seen in the recent past. So moral certainty, I'm not so sure, but moral clarity, we were speaking before about values. Absolutely, people want you to have moral clarity as a leader. And to be able to speak about some of the contradictory or conflicting views, how you're working through decisions, how you're going to sense check them, and then move forward. People will accept that you acted in good faith and potentially made some mistakes. But we've become so polarized, so quick to reply. There's a saying, I wish I could be as certain about anything as you are about everything. And before our call, I was listening to a debate, and in the debrief, somebody said, I take your point, but, and I felt that the but cancelled out all of the words around, I take your point. You know, step one is the ability to hold space, create space for other people to share their divergent views. That just makes us better. But step two is, and how many leaders do you know are actually willing to let go of their viewpoint and to change? It was George Bernard Shaw who said, progress is impossible without change. And those who can't change their minds cannot change anything. I would love us to replace the but with an and. And what if we saw leadership as being so flexible that it was a great thing, a strength, a virtue, if you were to able to say, you know what, I've heard you and I'm beginning to change my mind. Because of what you've contributed, I still have a perspective around X, and where that shifting is around Y, rather than I've heard you, but, and then holding on to the same opinion. I remember a few years ago in the corporate world, my leader had gone on a training course around active listening, seek first to understand before seeking to be understood. And then when they came back, I noticed there was a different dynamic in our conversations. It was more silent whilst I shared my perspective first. But in the retort or reply to my comments, nothing had really changed. And that made me realize we can learn these skills. They are commitments, they're intentions to get better. The key is, how do we change our mindset so that we see it as a great thing to be able to be flexible, work through the ambiguity, the complexities of life. We do want leaders to take a decision. We do want you to be accountable, but we're also looking for the humility, the ability to say you got stuff wrong, and share with the public or share with the employees some of the contradictory views and how you reached your decision in line with the values. What's your perspective?
I definitely think as a manager, since reading your book, I have been very aware of creating psychological safety for my team. And that is, we do have space which allows us to fail and to make mistakes. So my attitude when they come to me with anything is that we're not saving lives. This is not brain surgery. Everything is fixable. And of course, within my arena, everything is fixable. Everything in my 15 years of higher education has been fixable. So I think once that pressure comes off the team, then they're free to perform openly, as in they're free to make mistakes, they're free to be dynamic, they're free to be innovative. And that has come out of, obviously, the book, of reading the book. So the other thing is, I would ask you, how do you stop people from reverting to type? So we can then say, okay, we're going to be conscious leaders. And then how do you stop the fact that they won't revert in a week, a month, a year back to being unconscious?
It's a great question, because habits take 20, 40, 60 times to be embedded and for new neural pathways to be connected or certain ones to be disconnected. So what I'm hearing is, it's great to agree to move towards better. And then how do you make sure that you hold somebody accountable or support them? And I think that for me, having a coach, I have coaches, multiple, has been the most impactful thing that I've done. I'm also aware that not everybody can afford a coach, but in this world of conscious leadership that we're creating, maybe there's a value exchange. Somebody who has the skills to create a website for a coach can receive coaching in return. That's single-handedly been the most impactful thing for me, to be able to have that place to work through this stuff, create new habits, and recognize when I'm reverting to time. Another thing that I've seen work well is when you have accountability partnerships. So perhaps if you imagine a learning environment where you decide with a peer who attended that shared learning experience that you would like to stay connected for a certain amount of time. It's not really mentoring because it's more peer, though mentoring or reverse mentoring can be great as well. And then through that peer accountability buddy or learning buddy, you're able to offer feedback to each other based on when you see that behavior of the past arise again. And you'll be able to talk about where it worked well, it wasn't applicable, there's a challenge with somebody accepting that in your team, with your leader, whatever that problem statement looks like. But I would encourage that peer accountability partnership across networks, could be even different companies, in order just to keep you accountable and have somewhere to go to. The other thing is, ask for feedback. You know, as you know, I love giving feedback. The challenge is how many people ask for it. And when you ask for feedback, you really step into your power. You come across as confident, not weak. You're less likely to be triggered by any comment because you're the one who has opened the doorway, the threshold for that learning experience. I use the power question of what is the one thing you would like me to work on, rather than is there anything, as the latter could be, you know, everything's great. Mm-hmm. But when I ask consistently, what is the one thing you would like me to work on or to get better at? Or then usually people, after a while, remember we said before, it's that consistency. People feel psychologically safe to share and they keep scanning. They're looking to see, do you do anything with that information? How powerful would it be in a couple of weeks or a month later to go back to that person and say, what feedback can you offer me on the thing we spoke about? What have you noticed? Mm-hmm. What's the next stretch or the edge for me?
Excellent. I noticed when I've asked you before for leadership advice and I've said, okay, I need to be more Samie. And you say, no, you need to be more Kirsten. And I think that is so simple and yet such a brilliant piece of leadership advice. Trying to be someone else. We're trying to live up to an ideal or a standard that we have, each one of us having a different leadership model.
Well, it takes me back to what Marco was saying around bringing others with you, but creating a path for them to travel even further than you did. And in my mind, that's the power of leaders as facilitators or guides. Time for Humanity is a guidebook. And then whatever resonates, the encouragement is for leaders and readers to then dig in and to start exploring. Some people have chosen to go down the route of Ikigai, conscious leadership, for example, today. Some people have focused on the brainwaves and the power of entering different states of consciousness to be more present, whatever part resonates with you. But it's a guidebook because we're just next to you rather than ahead and dragging you or behind and pushing you. It's just a guide on your journey. But that's why it was called Time for Humanity, because you already have everything that you need. Mm-hmm. When we reconnect with our humanity and we lead from that space, you start to shift the mindset, which will allow all of these skills and commitments to come to life, rather than all the things that we know already, but we find a challenge to implement. So hopefully the book and the message brings it all together as that guidebook.
Now, I wanted to go a little bit off topic. I saw that you posted about the KPMG Pulse survey, which was quite a shock to me. I thought that maybe it was incorrect, and I actually went to the root source of the information and double checked it. So I wanted to touch upon that. So looking at KPMG's Pulse survey of CEOs in February and March, which of the following poses the greatest threat to your organization's growth over the next 3 years? Internal unethical culture risk is at the bottom, as it was last year as well. So Reef made a really good comment about this, where he said he wasn't surprised at all. He believes it's because the issues to do with internal company culture and ethics do not come with their definitive metrics. And we know how much CEOs relish their metrics. It's sort of like a case of scientific fact versus myths. The unfortunate reality is that the culture and ethical issues remain one of the biggest reasons companies fail today, but remain at the bottom of the pecking order in terms of management strategy.
Well, I don't want to take it out of context, because I have to say I'm not entirely sure how in July and August 2020, talent was the #1 risk to growth. But then in the February-March survey, assuming it's the same CEOs who have responded, talent is second to bottom. And as you say, Kirsten, I've noticed that internal ethical culture is bottom in both surveys, which concerns me because, as Sharif was saying, it is the internal ethical culture. It's the talent or / the people in your organization who are the ones who are going to be able to deliver sustainable growth, particularly in these challenging times. I noticed that reputational risk, for example, is perceived as a greater challenge to growth than talent or unethical cultures. Surely a healthy culture with people who are engaged and aligned to the values would avoid any reputational risk in the business. So I'm not entirely sure how there is such a disconnect. If you were speaking to somebody in the cybersecurity world, they would be delighted that that's noticing the top risk, for example. So I understand that with my message around humanity, values, culture, leadership, of course, I'm going to be looking at why is it at the bottom? But there are a couple of things, if I hold it lightly, that come to mind. KPMG say that they are interviewing, or they're getting this information from the world's most influential CEOs. And I think my reflection would be, I would love those CEOs to be more reflective of their consumer journey in order to experience how the talent, the people, and the ethical culture or otherwise of the organization plays out in behavioral terms. You know, when you go about your day paying bills, being a customer, consumer, there are so many touch points where you think, this is what's going to stop the company from being successful. It's the support ticket I raised in November for Zoom, which is still not replied to. It's when I came back from Rwanda, remember one of my hiking boots ripped open. It was so arduous, I never imagined. So I had to come down the mountain top, and people, put it this way, were clapping me when I came down with that. He's alive. I was a state. When I got back to Dubai, I just couldn't get the mud out of my nails. So I decided to treat myself for the new year to a manicure pedicure. And a couple of weeks later, I found that I had 3 ingrown nails, which were really painful. And as I walked past the grooming spa salon, I decided to go in and give my feedback. And the first response was, do you have the photographs? And I said, no, I didn't take any photographs of them. They said, and why didn't you tell us the next day? I said, well, because I've been managing them. I put medicine and, they're fixed now, but I just wanted to offer you that feedback. And they replied, yes, well, our internal processes, we would only be able to do something about it if you were to give us photographs and you had called with it. I said, so I didn't even come for you to do anything about it. I just wanted to offer you this information. But what was very curious was I noticed that the person was wearing on their name tag an award which said, winner of the world's best male grooming spa. And now that they're franchising that model, I remembered many years ago, I was on a 4-day public leadership course with the general manager. So I know that that person has all of the skills and information to be successful, but the growth and the franchise of the company has meant they have moved further away from the consumer experience. And I believe that is what's going to stop the growth. So maybe it's an understanding of the word ethical. Maybe unethical is too strong a word. The point I'm trying to make is it's these little things that tell us that the CEOs may be disconnected from what they're being told by their immediate direct reports and society and the customers. Recently there was a FATCA requirement that was sent across, and I was shielding at that time after I came back from Rwanda, so I wasn't able to go outside. And yet, of course, I wanted to offer the bank all of the digital documents that they'd requested to make sure that I was FATCA compliant with US tax law. As I diligently completed, I tried to send everything back, and it turns out the member of staff have a size restriction limitation on their emails. So the people who asked me to send the forms, I wasn't able to send back to them. And the way that we managed that was by taking photographs and bypassing their internal processes and regulations, which I would suggest could be unethical, in order to meet that requirement, which I would say, you see what I mean? So there's just this disconnect that's going on.
I think also, the front-facing person is nowadays coming across as quite defensive because they're having so much pressure put on them from above to do what the customer says. However, don't admit accountability and don't do this and don't do this. As we become more of a litigious society, everyone has this caution, defensiveness. Be very careful about what you say and to whom.
I say in the book, organizations don't transform, people do. And Sharif talks about the metrics. I think we have to let me own it. I have to, in this community of people who write and who speak about leadership, I have to own the definition of culture is not really understood. When I've been speaking in America or London, been listening to some of the fellow speakers on culture, and they're not really talking about culture, they're talking about the environment. Culture is deep. There's a short chapter in the book on systemics. It's the stuff underneath the waterline. If you like, it's the meteorology that produces the environment, the weather. And many of the indicators that are being shown to the top management, they are of lag indicators, which is not culture. Culture are lead indicators. And we can do a better job of explaining what culture is, how it is going to be able to navigate the business towards sustainable growth, where people, that's consumers as well as employees, have a wonderful experience. And we can do a better job potentially of telling a story with data. We worked with one client to look at the values and culture. We created strategic enablers. And then we added a RAG status, red, amber, green, so that we had a dashboard which showed current and projected with a red, amber, green. So it would capture attention at a high level, but supported by massive amount of data. The challenge was, how do we bring the narrative, the storytelling, art and skill to life in order to tell a more meaningful story around these numbers, because metrics can be used, as we well know, for any version of who you're speaking to. I was listening to somebody speak the other day and they said, we've grown our facilitator associate pool to 500. And the next question was, and how many of those facilitators have been deployed on projects in the last 12 months? Only 30% of it. What are the questions that can be offered under? So we move from efficiency metrics to effectiveness, and we tell a real or more accurate story with that data in line with what culture is, which is the lead metrics which are going to take you forwards.
We are often tracking the wrong metrics and using the information not to its best benefit, not to the benefit of people. It's to the benefit of a CEO, and its whole driver, and the driver is money. That is what it comes down to.
And this is where there is an irony in the story. I look at Deliveroo, which has just had arguably the least successful stock market float in history, because there are questions of the people, the talent in the organization, and the ethical nature, the bottom two things that came out in the February-March pulse survey from KPMG, which contributed to something which was the results or the lack of money, which we know is a driver for many people, because CEOs are responsible, answerable, accountable to the board, and they need to provide sustainable dividends and growth to their communities. These things are directly connected. And my first job, as you know, was at Walt Disney World. And I was amazed that every manager had to go on rotation periodically to do the job of the employee, which they call cast member. But that rotation allowed them the empathy, which curious leaders demonstrate, to be able to understand what are the guest or the customer touch points which are not serving the purpose of the organization. What is the feedback that you hear on the shop floor or equivalent that you don't hear in your so-called ivory or glass tower, or these days working from home? So I would say to leaders, go on rotation, pay more bills, deal with more logistics in the household. And I think very quickly you'll realize talent and ethical culture are the things that will help you deliver growth in the long term.
And we have that in common, because when I worked for Club Med, they were the same. We did the rotation. Not only did it keep everyone fresh, we had an understanding of everyone's role. If anyone was away sick or for unforeseen circumstances, we could jump into anything. And I think that is actually a really good model for business. One quick question I have for you is, what is Samie's ideal of conscious leadership?
Well, I think the conscious leadership is being conscionable, so acting more ethically. We said before, understanding our 2 or 3 core values, chunking those up, so a value of excellence or fairness then cascades down into behavior. So it's wonderful to examine behavior and get feedback on it. I think conscious leaders also chunk up and think, what is a thing that sits above this in order for it to fall into the behaviors in that goldfish bowl, as I'm always showing up for people. I think conscious leaders are ones who use the words, thank you, sorry, I don't know.
Yeah.
And they don't just borrow buzzwords like, I hear you, but they create space. We talk in the book about the different levels of listening to collapse, not all of the time, but some of the time into deeper listening. Because as I say, the problem with leadership was not having a vision. The problem with leadership was the inability to really listen. And my journey as a conscious leader is to work on my ego. I'll say it again, do your work. When you do your work, I think the most humble thing you can do as a leader is to do your work, because those things then are more likely to stick. All of us are good people trying to be at our best, trying to deal with the very many challenges of home and work life. And if we were able to examine how ego arises and causes stuckness or blockages, stops us from implementing the things that we have good intentions to do, then everything else will flow much easier. But in order to do that, conscious leaders have to do your work and get a coach, a good coach.
Excellent. Now, Tracy in the UAE says that when I finished the book, I felt hopeful, inspired, and energized. What is the next step for us to bring Time for Humanity to life?
Well, for Tracy, thank you for those beautiful words. For Tracy, I would say, what part of the book, the guidebook, resonated, and then go deeper. When you find that you're inspired to action with a certain part, or you want to go deeper, there are so many more resources for you to explore, whatever that theme is. We said before, it could be ikigai, conscious leadership, future-proof culture, values. And then I talk about the 1 degree shift. What's the 1 degree or the 1% change that you can make consistently starting today? They say if you start on the 1st of January with $100 and you invest 1% in it every day, by the end of the year, you go from $100 to 3,778. That means nearly 38 times more from your investment by just doing 1%, but every single day. I just turned 40, and as you know, I had aspirations to go back. I used to live in Romania, so I wanted to go to a castle in Romania, have friends fly in, and do a murder mystery weekend. Clearly, it never happened because of coronavirus. So I had a very different but lovely birthday, very quiet and reflective one. And it got me thinking about, so what could I do then that gives me energy? And I decided to do something called the 40 Acts of Humanity, to celebrate my 40 years so far on Earth. And those acts, I'm posting them on my Instagram stories. They're really small things. They're 1 degree things. Now, Marmalade Fish, which is the consultancy that I own, yes, we've supported sustainable development goals. We have funded communities in Madagascar. We've done big things with koala bears as they went functionally extinct in Australia. You know, we have supported global things that we feel part of that global village, and we've aligned to the SDGs and the sub-goals. But what I'm noticing more and more is the 1 degree, the time for humanity is, it's small and it's consistent, and it starts with self, home, and then the street, the school, or the community. I mean, you follow me on Instagram. What have you noticed about these Instagram stories?
I loved the fact that people are picking up on it and either following or being inspired by it. So the feeding of the cats, you know, that was so touching to see. It's so, you know, it's such a small thing. It doesn't take much time out of anyone's day. It's easily doable for most people who are not allergic to cats. But then we have, you know, when you're walking and collecting rubbish, and then you saw some girls and they said, we're doing this because the man was doing it. It's such a small thing, but can make such a big impact in a local community.
Absolutely. And that's why you mentioned before, I speak about leadership being a verb. It's something that you step into consciously. And a leader could include those young girls who we saw in the community who were picking up rubbish. And a leader could be Sir Tom, who raised millions for the NHS before he passed away earlier this year. And I believe he was 100 years old. Sometimes we think about leadership being something that happens around the age of 32 to maybe 45. We think that it's not assistant vice president, but it's VP or SVP, or we put all these limitations or restrictions around what leadership is. My message is leadership is for everyone. And it is a verb, so it's something you step into. And the day that the act of humanity was putting on our gloves and cleaning up the local community, I can't tell you the number of people who stopped and said, wow, that's leadership. I mean, leadership is picking up cigarette butts and masks that are thrown around in your street, as well as leadership being serving sustainable development goals for the whole of humanity. So I would say, what are the small things that you can do? That 1%, the $100 investment of 1% every single day. Find parts of the book, the guidebook, which you want to go deeper in. I guess awareness always precedes change. So Time for Humanity, and the hashtag Time for Humanity, is creating the awareness of us reconnecting with our humanity, which is reactivating our discerning mind, being able to question the narrative, being able to hold multiple and often opposing divergent perspectives, honoring our local community as well as being more aware of the global village that we now live in. I guess, Kirsten, I'll ask you well, you're now listening to the book apparently, but I hope not to help you get to sleep, but when you read the book, what are the things that you've noticed have shifted for you since?
So as you know, I bought the book in 2 formats. So I got the ebook as soon as it came out on Kindle, and then yesterday I've also got the audiobook. I think it sparked a curiosity within me to take an objective look at my leadership style, and it also gave me the ability to get some quick wins. As I said, I check in with my team on a much more personal level, and that's definitely a quick win, and they're very receptive to that. Active listening. I will have them chair meetings so that they get that rotational view. But I think, one of the points that you made that really resonates with me is that you're saying, leadership is a verb. Time for Humanity is not a movement, it's an action, and it's a global village. And I think that is what the book really gave me, was a feeling of connectiveness to anyone who's on the conscious pathway.
I love that. It's not a movement. It's a community of people who are willing to ask the big and important questions because they have the courage and the compassion and the curiosity to live a fuller life, to celebrate all that is good and beautiful in this world, but whilst being really honest that life can be very challenging. And if we do our work, we become aware and then importantly, step into action. But the action doesn't need to be big changes. The 1 degree shift is enough. And we grow the community of good news stories as well as challenges. There are so many beautiful, powerful stories out there. I'm pleased that the hashtag is now being used for us to capture some of those inspiring stories, which feels like anti-news, so that we're able to tap into all these beautiful and incredible things that people are choosing to awaken to. I will say, perhaps a little bit naughty, but a couple of people have sent me a direct message on Instagram after I've done a time act of humanity for my birthday celebration. And they've said, oh, this is super inspiring. And I've gone, oh, thank you so much. It was just giving donuts to the security guards in our complex. And then I'll ask the question, what have you done as a result of it? And they'll go, nothing yet, but we hold the intention to. Fantastic. And then the next act, which might happen a week later, they'll go, love it. It's amazing. So inspiring. Well, I'm going to do something similar. And I ask, and have you started? And usually people go, no, but I will. And I guess my message is start now. One thing, use the hashtag, read the book, be inspired, but just show up and do your work.
And tomorrow is now.
Absolutely.
Get started. I think a lot of people have the misconception that leadership is something that attracts an income, and that is it. They think, I've checked my leadership at the door when I leave my job. Now I'm a home person who is not a leader. They need to reframe that you're a leader in every aspect of your life, whether it's being a parent, a colleague, a friend, somebody who's very important in your community.
Absolutely. I love that. Well, thank you, Kirsten. What a great conversation. So
that's all for now. So please do send across any thoughts or comments that you have, and tune in next time for the next installment of How to Future-Proof a Company Culture.